In Matthew 4:19, Jesus says, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Join us in this conversation as we discuss following Jesus, leadership, and doing life with others. Welcome to the 419 Disciple Makers Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the 419 Disciple Makers Podcast. I'm your host today, Mark Danzey, and I have with me today Dr. Jay Hughes. Jay, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
It sure is. And you just returned. You're in a cool tie and a suit. I've never seen you in a suit and tie, but you just returned from the governor's breakfast. The governor of the state of Georgia had a prayer breakfast, and you were invited and were there.
One of the prayers.
So you're all prayed up, and we're grateful.
I got to, cast my wares in front of other prayers from different denominations. I think I was the token mainline denomination guy.
Okay, all right. Well, you're prayed up, we're prayed up, and today we're excited about what he's going to share with us because I think some of these things are going to be helpful to you as you live out God's call of making disciples of Jesus. And so, Jay, tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you came to faith.
Well, I had a couple of good things happen to me early on. Both my parents were very active in the church. My dad was a Baptist. My mom was a Methodist, and we were living in Macon at the time, where my dad is from. So we were going to a Baptist church then. And we were attending worship during the summertime. The Ingleside Baptist Church had their evening worship. Remember those? At night outside. And so I remember sitting in the congregation. We were in chairs. I was about 9 years old. And I remember looking up through the trees at the stars. And I felt this yearning, this pulling, this tugging, and I just had no idea what it was. I really didn't. And so I talked to my mom about it later, and she said, "You need to accept Jesus," which, I think if I'd have said that my foot hurts, she'd have gone, "You need to accept Jesus." And so in very traditional Baptist style, I walked the aisle about 3 weeks later and got baptized at that point. And so I share that story because I spent the next maybe 15, 20 years trying to decide if it was real. I was 9 years old. I knew more about what it meant to be a Christian at 12 and at 15 and at 18 and at 22 than I did at 9. And so I would go back to it and say, well, did it really start there? And I came to the understanding that, yes, it did start there. And yes, I was expected to grow, to get better, to know more, to understand it more fully, and to look at the experience that from a mature perspective, that there was I responded in the manner in which I understood to respond as a 9-year-old. I mean, I was still believing in Santa Claus at the time. So, it was like, Jesus, sure, Santa Claus is even better kind of a thing. And so, the lifetime that follows didn't devalue that moment when I accepted Christ. And mainly what I keep going back to with that was, it was definitely not something I manufactured within myself. It wasn't a feeling that
because you didn't even really understand the feeling.
Exactly. And I think that makes it seem more real, or makes it more real in my perceiving of it, in that I didn't know I know I had to do something. I just didn't know what. And fortunately, I had, a mom who was a very spiritual person and was able to interpret that for me. And interpret it in that way. I mean, she could have been.
Thank goodness she didn't just farm you out to the church and say,
you need to go talk to the preacher or anything like that.
She knew how to share this whole faith journey with you.
Yeah, she was. Mom was a very active, church person growing up herself, but also a very active teacher as a young person and as a young mother and all that. So, she had a high level of spiritual, which really was very characteristic of our lives, that we were not your typical church-going people. When we were in Germany, my dad was in the Army, so we were stationed in Germany in my high school years. It was not unusual to have Mom get called out of the house to deal with demon possession issues.
Wow! Among
the military families, and I never really got involved in that. I kind of watched it happen. And, she would be involved in going over to somebody's house and talking with a teenager or talking with a young adult or something along those lines, where they would do exorcisms.
Wow.
And so that kind of put a different tint on spiritual experiences that I had early on. And so, Mom was the real thing, still is the real thing, but she's still alive. She's 84. And
a legacy.
Yeah. And so
when did you know from you accepted Christ that God really had a plan for you and a purpose for your life? When did you recognize that?
Well, I received the call into the ministry in between my freshman and sophomore year in college. So I knew what was expected of me at that point. And
this was more than you just had a rough weekend, right?
Right. Okay. I mean, no, I actually had a vision.
Oh.
And, which is kind of interesting I was sort of raised right in many ways. And that came after that because during that summer, had a vision, and the way I explained it to people, it was like a carpet unrolling, and there would be scenes that would pop up of me doing things, and all these scenes were me preaching. And so not only did I see it as a call in the ministry, but I saw it as a call into the pastoral ministry as well. And so that I'm still doing that today.
Yeah.
I was ordained with a class of about 15 other ministers in 1982, and I'm the only one that's still in the pastoral ministry. They're all doing something else.
How about that?
In church life, but
that's some good stick-to-itness there.
Well, it was. I felt like I've had to defend that a couple times over the years. Like, why are you here? It's kind of a thing, and because for one reason or another, they felt like maybe I should be a teacher in a seminary. Maybe I needed to be doing something somewhere else. That's a kind way of putting it. We're going to ask you to move today. But I said, that's my call is to do this. I know that there are certain insights that I have on things, but I'd rather share them with lay people than with seminary students.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was always my answer, and that would still be my answer today.
So a lot of pastors, ministers are focused on their ministry and everything, but this concept of disciple making is really something that can be new to a lot of church leaders and stuff, but not for you. You've been doing this for a long time. You were introduced to disciple making, obviously, many, many years ago.
Yeah, in college.
And so how has that affected your personal life and your ministry and what you do?
Well, I'd say that perceptually, it's had an impact on me in the sense that I see ministry is not something that I do. Actually, I see ministry as something that's done to me. And so the way in which I process that is I'm not in the ministry, fortunately, for all the wonderful good that I'm going to do for the world and transforming humanity so that we can all, get to Mars safely. No, it's the ministry is what God is doing to me through it. It's not a selfish kind of thing. It's the caliber of person that I think I am today would not be there if I hadn't been in the ministry, and because God has seen to it that I have been in situations which are well beyond my skill sets, well beyond my personality, well beyond my comfort zone, pretty much the entire experience of 40 something years now. And so, the confidence that I have in God would have been so easy to push to the side, to ignore, to compartmentalize if I was a layperson doing what I really want to do is, work in aviation. Because that's been my passion. And I've found ways to do aviation while this is all going on too. But if I only went to church once a week and didn't know somebody who was a disciple-making mentor type relationship with me, then my understanding of God and my understanding of what Christ has done and my understanding of the everyday life would have been nowhere near what it is. It's hard to quantify in terms that make any sense to people, but and it also is hard to quantify in terms that doesn't make it sound kind of selfish that, it's all, my whole life is about me. And, but that's been what I wanted to communicate with people through discipling, that, your whole life is about you and what God's going to do with you in your life. And yes, but the decision that you're going to have to make at some point is whether or not God's going to do this better than you are with your life. And so my testimony to you is, every decision that I've ever had a big part in has not been as good as the ones where I didn't.
That's a statement.
And so
that's quite a statement. So you were sharing with me earlier, for the listeners today, Jay and I are in a group with 4 other pastors where we are all coming together to focus on our own skills set, so to speak, in disciple making. You were sharing a concept earlier with me of 3 things, that kind of 3 stages of Christianity and all. Yeah. I really think our listeners are going to enjoy that. Why don't you share that?
Well, over the years, I've tried to be relevant. I have 2 very, very smart daughters who are millennials. And so they don't hesitate. And actually, I watched them, how they treated my youth directors. They just worked them over. You couldn't use jargon with my daughters. They would ask questions like why and when and where are we supposed to do this kind of thing. And so I've tried to, when I was early on, I'm talking about as a teenager, talking with people, because I was very curious about being a Christian. And I'd ask questions, and nobody could answer my questions. And I'm talking about my Sunday school teacher, pastors, and that kind of thing, because I was really struggling with faith. I mean, how do I know when I have faith was the main question. And actually, I read Billy Graham's book on faith. That really helped. But I would say, so what is faith? How do I know when I have faith? And the answer, well, you got to believe. I said, well, how do you believe? Well, you got to have faith. And it's like, really? Is that the answer you got? And so I
a little circular.
Yes. And so I sort of dedicated myself at that point that if I'm going to be a minister, I'm going to be able to answer people's questions. I'm going to find an answer. It's going to be a good answer. It's going to be something that makes sense. It's not going to be something that is just chock full of jargon that I have to explain the words in the sentence before I can explain the sentence. And so in part of my reflection, in particularly working in disciple groups and watching men and women work through their spiritual growth experiences, I kind of saw some things repeating. And this is what I came up with, is that there are 3 phases to living the Christian life. And the first one is, what's it going to give me? What can I get out of it? What's in it for me? And that is that you're a Christian because of the benefits, the blessings, the promises.
Comes with a nice package.
Yeah. And, people have needs, and they know that. And so what draws them to being a Christian person are the needs and the promise of having those needs met in some fashion.
And the prayer of, God, if you'll do this, I'll follow you. Or,
definitely. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's all about, what am I going to get out of this?
It's just like, some people, they'll become a Christian person because it's the last chance they have to get the answer to their question, or they have the last chance to get their need met. And so Jesus did a lot of talking about those kinds of things, though. I mean, he talked about blessings. He talked about mansions. He talked about families. He talked about gifts and fellowship. I mean, he really...
Peace.
Yeah, peace and protection and all the things that in Jesus' day would have been premium stuff, with the Roman Empire there. And so, that's the first phase. And after a while, I said, well, there's a crisis that occurs somewhere in that process. It's different for different people. But the crisis is you get to the point of realizing that Jesus died on the cross for you. Because when my daughter Amanda wanted to become a Christian, I said, well, Amanda, that our basic understanding is that Jesus died on the cross for our sins and your sins. What does that mean? Why did Jesus die for you, Amanda? And Amanda said, because I'm basically a good person. I'm good. I mean, she was like 11 years old. I'm a good person. Of course, Jesus would die for me. And I had to tell her, you're not ready. And, that's... So people...
But that's an answer I hear even 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds giving us.
Yeah.
The question of, if you get to the gate and whoever meets you there, St. Peter or whoever says, why should I let you into heaven? What would your response be? And in your response is your theology. Yeah. And if the response is, I've never killed anybody, right, I'm basically a good person.
Yeah, never cheated on my tax returns, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah, that's going to say, that's where the trap door comes in.
Yeah. Whether you're 11 or 50, I've heard it.
That's right, yeah. And so anyway, at some point, the reality of the crucifixion of Jesus makes it. inside. And that creates a crisis because then you realize I can't do this just for what I'm going to get out of it. There's other obligations at work here. And, so they move to the next phase, and that is to overdo it. And that is, what can I do for it? Mm-hmm. And so the idea is that I'm going to now work hard. I'm going to be actively involved in the church. I'm actually even going to go to evening worship service to show how committed I am. And, if
mission trips. And
2 hours of devotional time and that sort of thing. So it's Paul on the road to Damascus, essentially. Mm-hmm. Paul was that guy who says, if there are people out there that are, teaching and preaching against Christians, well, I'm going to go kill them. Mm-hmm. I'm going to double it, And so that was the person that was on the Damascus road when he met Jesus, was that phase 2 person. Well, as a pastor, I love phase 2 people, because they're the ones that are going to work wherever you say. I mean, they're going to do lay leadership work. They're going to work on the council. They're going to work in the community. They're going to work in the church. They're going to give more money than everybody else. They're going to, it's like,
they'll say yes to any request.
Exactly. Because, they're trying not just to earn their way through all this, but they're trying to be the best. They see it also as a competition.
Right.
And so, what can I do for it? And
it being the church, Christianity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so they also enter into a crisis after a while. Now, the problem that we face in the church with that is that these people are the ones that are, by their very lifestyle, are promoting the concept that what it means to be a Christian is to be good. Mm-hmm. And people outside the church see that, and they say, well, I can be good without the church, so it's tough to witness to them.
Or I've seen that person that says they're good, but I saw them at the ball field or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Or on the golf course. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or bowling alley. That's good.
Now you're meddling.
I know, but that's just.
So the phase 1, let me make sure I'm tracking with you on that. Phase 1 is that we get into Christianity about what is this, how's this going to help me, bless me? And sometimes sermons are directed that way. If you'll just accept Jesus, everything will be okay. Yeah.
There's an entire theology out there about that called prosperity theology. And so, in other words, that if you have faith, the latest one is this spiritual water that they're selling online. If you get spiritual water, then and they talk about how they got $35,000 debt paid, or they had they just got a gift of $100,000, all that kind of stuff, because they had the spirit water. And
oh goodness,
that's
targeting phase 1 Christians.
Yes, or non-Christians. It's in that whole phase, because they're not very different from non-Christians. That's the mere men thing that Paul wrote about. And so
phase 2 then is, okay, now the crisis is the cross. What am I going to behold the man? What am I going to do with Jesus here?
Well, he's such a worthy and sacrificial, and he's done so much for me, so I'm going to do a lot for Jesus.
I'm going to pay Jesus back.
Yes, it's really a Southern thing too in many ways. It's like somebody will come up and say, "Thank you for doing this," and your answer is, "Well, thank you." I don't know for what.
Thank you for thanking me.
But that's exactly what I'm talking about.
So then the second is, what can I do for Christianity?
For Jesus,
and so these are the people that work hard and burn out.
Yes.
One of our pastors used to say this. He said, whether these people they become super Christians.
Yeah.
And this pastor used to say to him, if you are at the bar every night or at the church every night, the result's the same. You're not with your family. Mm-hmm. And so I see where that almost abuse happens for people who are willing to check the box of moral obligation here. And what can I do? What's the crisis that they face before you go to phase 3?
Well, they face that no progress has been made. They've invested this time, this energy, these feelings, these thoughts, these whatever it is that they're processing through their mind. And after a while, they look at their lives, and it's no closer to God than it was 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago. And there is the basic assumption that putting in the time as a Christian is enough to generate fruit, things of eternal value.
Right.
And even if they're sitting there working this through in their mind, thinking, well, even if I was doing really the wrong thing or wasn't doing it good enough or fast enough or whatever, at least I should get credit
Yeah.
in some fashion.
Some token or something.
And that's when they realize that it is not their contribution, that they have a genuine awareness of what grace is, and that is unmerited favor. And the way in which I explain it to them is that grace is easy to understand. Anything that's a wage is not grace. Anything that you earn is a wage and not grace. And so it's even if it's cheap. I mean, that was what Bonhoeffer's book was about. Mm-hmm. It says even if you had to, instead of paying $1 million to get God's grace or God's favor, you spend 10, it's still not grace.
Mm. So how does this phase 3 person, how does their life change once they get into phase 3 from phase 2?
Well, it becomes a relationship with Christ. I mean, the way I normally explain it and experience it is to say, it's just Jesus. Mm-hmm. And you realize that, most of what you've been trying to work away from and overcome and all of that, Jesus already knows that. And that, the greatest fear that we have is that people will get to know us as we really are and run away screaming. And so a lot of this work has been to distract Jesus from us, and we talk about how omnipotent Jesus is, and then we kind of treat Jesus as if he doesn't know anything. Uh-huh. And
it's like that one author said that, in the Gospels, Jesus never told us to worship him. He only told us to follow him.
Exactly.
But it's a lot easier to just show up in worship.
Yes, but also
it is to truly follow.
It's one of the, I try to keep my pet peeves to myself because it's just like people always miss it. But one of the pet peeves I have is that a person, what they consider themselves doing is praying, and they're informing God about things. Mm-hmm. It's like, God, we've had a bad year. Really? It's like, hey, can't you just picture Jesus going, wait a minute, everybody stop.
Yeah, let me see the P&L.
I was going to say, they've had a bad year this year.
Yeah.
It's like, Peter, why don't you tell me?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in my desk every single day. You walk through my office and you never told me they had a bad year. What's up with that? And so, it's, it's just one of those things where, who are you talking to? Yeah. And so when you get to this point where you are, in a fellowship, in a connection, I always kind of picture it as it's you and Jesus, and the whole world's a mountain. And sometimes it's cold on the mountain. Sometimes it's windy and uncomfortable. But essentially there is a certain privacy that goes with that in your everyday life. And, one of the ways in which I try to help people to understand and experience this was I asked them this question. I said, when was the last time you told Jesus that you love him? I mean, practice with me. I love you, Jesus. And I have to say, and that's very uncomfortable for them, because for a lot of them, they're not telling anybody they love them. Of course, my wife knows I love her. Right. Kind of thing.
I told her on our wedding day.
I was going to say, she was there.
If anything changes.
I mean, we ate the cake. Yeah. She knows I love her. And, we talk a lot about believing in Jesus. We talk a lot about understanding Jesus or appreciating Jesus, but you're not in a relationship with anybody that you're not talking to in the first person. And so, the good thing about that is that after they have done that, they begin to do that all day, every day.
Yeah, it's that personal relationship concept. Yeah.
And so actually it's more Jesus becoming alive for the first time, I think, because prayer can be done so poorly that it makes Jesus less alive to you.
Really?
Yeah, because as you're praying, you are not talking in the normal language. If I have to come up with a prayer language in the sense of using shouldst and couldst and can'tst and all that kind of stuff, that I have a language that's not my own. I try to use English when I talk with Jesus, and I try to use the same kind of verbs, progression when I talk with Jesus, because also I try not to use Jesus' name every 6 seconds either. That's another thing too, that, that having if you know somebody and love somebody, and they love you, you don't use their name all the time.
Yeah.
And so I have lay people and preacher type people. They'll get up, stand up in the church, and they'll do the prayer, and it's like, Jesus, we just want you to know that we love you, Jesus. And Jesus, we just believe in you. And Jesus, take care of us today. And there's only one person that talks to me that way that I know of. That's a car salesman. And so, it's like, Jay, it's good to see you today. How's it going with you? Have you seen our latest over here?
Right.
I understand that you like red. I went out and, Jay, I got you a J red car over here. And so
it feels like a forced connection.
Yeah. And
how do you see this? You when you were sharing with me before we got on the recording about this correlating into marriage. And so for some of our listeners today, I think that really brings it home too. How would you say these three phases of the relationship with God also works in a relationship with marriage?
I think that Paul really helps us there in Ephesians when he equates marriage with the church. Mm-hmm. The relationship between church and Jesus. Yes. Yeah. If you want to get all that specific on it. Yeah. Ephesians 5.
Just trying to help our listeners here.
I was going to say, and the speaker doesn't needs help with that. Jesus is the bride of, the church is the bride of Christ. And then he goes on and talks about how husbands and wives relate in that dynamic there. And so, there's already scriptural overlap for that. Yeah. And so, but I've embraced that a long time. I felt like I would learn more about God from being married, and being married to somebody, because I learned about love that way. I learned about the aliens that are among us, women. And, I say that jokingly, but in a lot of the counseling that I've done with couples getting married, most of the problems that they have is that the men want their wives to act like men, and women want their husbands to act like women. And, they just don't have the same skill sets.
Right.
And so, the idea that, I entered into the relationship with Ann with what I could get out of it. Mm-hmm. And, after a while, I realized what a wonderful person she was. And so I was in the relationship for what I could do in it. And I kind of wanted people to see me as having a good marriage and, see me as a good husband. I want this. The reason that you work so hard is not so much for the way you really are, it's how you want other people to see you.
Right.
And so you're serving Christ in that fashion, and just so that you can get other people's approval. So, and then, after a while, you realize that it's just about Ann. That's it. And so
just love for your wife.
Yeah. And it creates almost something that's unique. The Ephesians things, I'd like to share with you sometime about it, that Ephesians, because it one of the things that it does so well is it talks about how love actually works in a marriage, but also there is a goal for marriage. And the basic idea is that if you are married for X number of years, that's a good marriage. And, my grandparents celebrated their 70th wedding anniversary a few years before they died. And, on the whole, that's right up there with Queen Elizabeth II. But,
yeah.
And, but that's not what Ephesians 5 says. It talks about how Jesus worked with the church in such a way that they were holy, blameless, and beyond reproach. My job as the husband in this particular relationship is to present my wife holy, blameless, and beyond reproach. And so that's my goal. And that's how Christ created that. And the holy part's pretty simple in the sense that of the 4 billion women in the world, she's the only one. Mm-hmm. That's what holiness is. Mm-hmm. Of all the many gods that are out there, there's just one God, right. And that's what makes Christ holy. And so, she has to be the only one. And I have to communicate that to her and make that happen. Blameless. And that is that I do not blame Ann for the things about me that are broken. Mm-hmm. That was what...
Not her fault?
Well, see, you're going to push me on that, aren't you? No, that's what Adam did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, so Adam, so why'd you eat the apple again? She's broken. Exactly. She did it.
And then she blames the serpent.
Yeah, well, that's just, what comes along. But the point is that she needs, my job in this life is ensure that she feels blameless and understands herself as blameless in our relationship.
That's really good.
And then the other one is beyond reproach. And that is that the challenges, the gaps, the brokenness, the fears that she has within herself, that I come alongside those things to help her overcome those things. Mm-hmm. That we cannot, if we're afraid of something, we cannot convince ourselves not to be afraid of it. Mm-hmm. But somebody else can.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And so I can be afraid of something, and I can't convince myself not to, or I can't. There are things I can't do myself, and that's between Christ and the church. That's the important thing. Mm-hmm. We can't save ourselves. We can't grow in the Spirit. We can't develop the fruit of the Spirit without the Spirit.
Right.
And so the work that is done to us is not done by us; it's done to us. And the same is true in all relationships. Mm-hmm. The essence of love is vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, I always tell people that love is vulnerability in the face of given power. Mm-hmm. And they look at me like, it's not going to go on Valentine's, so don't even get it. But the essence of vulnerability is to give power to somebody else.
Yeah.
If I know your secrets, I have power over you. Mm-hmm. And the reason that we give those secrets and share those things is to give people power through our vulnerability. And the power is used to build rather than to destroy. Because what we're afraid of is that somebody learns our secret and then they use that against us. Well, right. I'm supposed to be the person in Anne's life which knows her secrets and her vulnerabilities, and I protect them, mm-hmm. and I guard them, and I help them get healed or get better because one of the most interesting things I learned about God, I learned from Anne in this fashion. I had 3 brothers and played sports and all this kind of stuff. I learned that as far as Anne was concerned, my opinion of her meant more than anything else. Hmm. And, that was part of that. We had a situation one day where she demonstrated that for me, and I just didn't get it for a while because she asked me one time if she was a good person. Hmm. And so I said, you cook, you clean, you do all these kinds of neat things. So yeah, are you a good person? And she goes, no. Am I a good person? And I'm thinking, did I miss something here? I'm going to get another. And I came up with 3 more, which was, not that difficult because I was, jamming up for our anniversary. And so, and she goes, no, do you think I'm a good person? And this is the thought that went through my mind. It can't be that easy. It just can't be. But I'm going to try it anyway. Yes, I think you're a good person. And she said, that's all I needed to know. And she walked into the kitchen, started cooking supper. And I go, what just happened here? And so I feel
like you've been tested somehow.
Yeah, but I realized that I was treating her like a man. Mm. Me, if you ask me, I'm a good person. I went 3 for 4 in a softball game. I got an A on my, theology term paper. I bowled a, 280 game. Yeah, I'm a good person. And so that's how guys answer that question. We look at the things that are on our wall, the plaques and the rewards and the salary.
Achievements, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I'm a good person. I'm a good breadwinner. And so, but, the way she was processing life was relational. Mm-hmm. And I have never been a person's number one relationship. Mm. Well, that plays out in your relationship with Christ. You've never been a number one relationship with somebody until you get that point where it's just me and Christ.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's that really sums it up for me. And that really discipleship, the spiritual life, the deeper spiritual life is about coming to the place that it's really it's not about where we've been or what we've done. It's about who we know and who we are, and that's our relationship.
That's
with Christ, and it works that way too in marriage. Well, Jay, thank you for blessing our audience today.
You're very welcome.
If you'd like more information about 419 Disciple Makers, you can go to the website and invite somebody to this podcast. It's been a pleasure being with you. Now, my prayer for you is that you'll go out there and make the Great Commission, making disciples of Jesus, the lifestyle that you live. God bless.
For more information, check out our website, 419disciplemakers.org.